What's in the front? Yeah, a little too.
Have a seat, crowded up front so we don't have to shout so much.
What? I have to get one of those, like, I'm sure we guys.
Right there.
Hey, Jordan.
Big guy comes.
Lots of love takes that hair, you know.
So you can get up.
Your hair?
Your hair.
I think we have enough chairs. If we don't, there's another stack of chairs.
I will,
break them up. Okay, so we have to get started because we're on a time schedule here. So thank you all for coming. Tonight is the inaugural 2013 meeting of the Pikes Peak Economics Club. So woohoo for that. Come on. Well, I'm going to take a minute, actually. There's so many new people here today to just have you all introduce yourselves briefly. Just 5 seconds each. Name, occupation. Okay? No speeches, nothing else. Just introduce yourself. Who are you? And if you're retired, who were you? I can do some club business first. Then we have a special announcement from a new candidate for City Council District 3. That's Keith King. He actually he founded the school back when it was Cheyenne Mountain Charter Academy in 1994 or so. And he's running for City Council District. He's now also chartered the Colorado Springs Early Colleges charter school. So he wrote the original legislation for charter schools. Did you not, Mr. King? Thank you. All right. So we'll get to you in a minute. Then I'll introduce our speaker for the evening. So, if you want information on the Pikes Peak Economics Club, you just Google it. It'll bring you to our website. You could spell it wrong. Google will figure it out. Okay? So our website is full of a lot of information. Okay? We post different news stories of interest to you, perhaps. The events page is very special because that tells you what's coming up. Those events pages are mapped to the calendar, so you can always just click on the calendar to see what's coming up. I will tell you what's coming up. I haven't posted it yet because it's hard for me to get everything done that I want to do. In 3 weeks, January 29th, we're hosting a special evening here with Mayor Steve Bach. It's going to be billed as a citizens question and answer. So that should be interesting, huh? So an evening with the mayor, meet and greet, and a discussion with him about some of the major issues you might be interested in. So January 29th, in a day or two, I'll have that posted. We're in the middle of final exams now because we have a crazy schedule here. So I haven't done it yet, but that'll be on January 29th. In February, we have re-invited back Dr. Thomas Kranawitter from Colorado Christian University, formerly of Hillsdale College. 1 year ago, he spoke here and he did a 3-part series on the founding documents of America, the interweaving of the Constitution with the Federalist Papers with the Declaration of Independence and how they all fit together. This year, he's going to do the opposite. He's going to do a 3-part series in February on progressivism, its historical roots, and modern incarnation. Okay, so you'll have a compare and contrast right there. That will be February 13th, 20th, and 27th. I will have that posted for February, so just stay tuned. Okay, just go to the website and figure it out from time to time. If you want to get on our email list, and I highly suggest you do, so that you know what's going on. Oh, by the way, you can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. For the email subscription right there, you just click on the link. Boom! PPEC email list, follow directions. Amazing, huh? All right. So, when you go to, for example, an event page, I'll just show you this for tonight, for example. The 8th, speed of light. January 8th, Pikes Peak Economics Club featuring Will Marshall. I'll introduce him in a minute. Okay, there's the page. It has the information, where, when, etc. A little summary of the event. Usually, the speaker's bio or their own website, and then the particular PowerPoint that we're showing tonight is available online as well. Okay, we have a revised version of that, and I'll post that as soon as it's ready. One more thing you might like on the website is our library. Our library consists of about 300 books, CDs, and DVDs, all on the topic of economic freedom. Because the club is dedicated to the proposition that you cannot have a controlled economy and maintain a free society. But yet a good 50% of your fellow citizens have no idea. So it's an educational system involved. Yeah, so they're all available over there, and there's no charge to come to the club meeting. There's a suggested donation. There's actually no official members of it. Just show up. Okay, and that you can access the library, sign things out. It's all on the honor system. So we do hope you feed the kitty when you leave. Okay, because you know the cookies cost some money. Some of the technology costs some money. My time is not free. So anyway, so thank you for donating. So a couple more things. We have, several months ago, we had Yaron Brook at the Ayn Rand Institute here. He spoke on his new book, Free Market Revolution, How Ayn Rand's Ideas Can End Big Government. It's a wonderful book, a very good read, so I'm kind of selling them for him. They're also available back there on a table outside the room. Okay. Inside the room, we've got a series of books to the right of the Pepsi cans. Those are all free of charge. They're primarily provided by the Peak Freedom Forum, as well as the Pikes Peak Economics Club. They're free of charge, but not free of cost. The cost to you is you have to read it, promise to read it, and promise to pass it on to someone else who promises to read it and pass it on. Okay? Now, to the left of the Pepsi cans, our author for the tonight, Will Marshall, has a couple of his own books that he's published, and they're great books on investing, and another one on how the accounting system in U.S. corporate America is a little bit off track. You think? With respect to the Economics Club, this happens all the time, it's wonderful. Things come out. I just happened to pick up this one. It's a DVD called 300 Million Slaves. That's you. You don't know it, but you are already, and you're becoming more of a debt slave, which means the fruits of your labor have already been spent. Okay? That's got to be made up somehow. This is becoming a nation of debt slaves. If you don't like that, you don't like reality. This is real. I mean, if you don't believe it, you don't like reality. It's real. It's very real. So it's a great book by an economist, Kirk Elliott, with the Save America Foundation. And then we just got this donation tonight. Thank you very much, Glenn Beck, Agenda 21. Those are into major conspiracy theories, because there are no accidents. Great book. So they'll be over here. I'll post them on the website on the library list. So that's enough of the club business. Wonderful computer I have, isn't it? It's frozen. Somebody, there we go.
Thanks.
All right, so Keith King, why don't you come up? I want to introduce Keith King. Keith has been kind of a friend and colleague for many years. He runs right now Colorado Springs Early College's former state senator, wrote the original legislation that enabled charter schools and school choice in the state of Colorado, helped to found this school and many other charter schools. So Keith King has got an announcement about his run for office. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you. Good evening. Actually, I'm in my final day as a state senator. Tomorrow they swear in the new senators at the Capitol, and I had the honor of serving for 4 years from Senate District 12, and then I served 8 years in the House. I would have served another 4 years, except they gerrymandered the districts, and when they gerrymandered the districts, this district became, which was all on the west side of Colorado Springs, went from here down into Powers and all over the place, and put my good friend Bill Cabin into the same district with me. And as the process goes, I had wanted to be, I was majority leader of the House and getting a chance hopefully to be Speaker. The Republicans, I'm a Republican, we lost the House, and so Bill Cabin wanted to try to get to be President of the Senate, so I walked away so he wouldn't have to have a primary. We both virtually the same, we're both social and fiscal conservatives. And so we decided to let it go, and I just started having people come to me and ask me, do I want to go from the frying pan into the fire? And so I thought about it, and thought of what we're doing in Colorado Springs, which is a new mayor concept, and how that all plays out with City Council, and how we could make the city function better with the new type of mayor system that we have, and how council could adapt and go to more of a strategic planning concept, policy development, more like a legislative body as opposed to an operational body. And so I've decided to announce my run for the candidacy. I'm going to do it Thursday at 4 o'clock on the west steps of the City Hall down at Nevada and Kiowa. So I'm honored to be able to once again throw my name in the hat and see what I can do. So Paul is correct. I've helped start this school, James Irwin Charter High School, and then I've started 2 other charter high schools. Carried over 100 pieces of legislation, about 70 of them around charter schools and education choice and how to do education better in the state of Colorado. So I'm honored to be able to come, and I'm getting really positive support. So this is a nonpartisan race I'm running for in City Council, so you have to get signatures. I don't know if you live in the district, the Council District 3 is this area of town up through Old Colorado City, downtown, and kind of from Uinta down through Union. And so there's, as you are probably aware of what's going on at the city, we changed all the districts. We used to have 4 city council districts and a lot of people serving at large. When we changed that process, we went to 6 districts, and so all the districts are brand new.
Someone needs to look up the districts. I have a map.
Great. Okay. Yeah, if you don't know where you live, all the district boundaries have changed. This is the first year, so there's no incumbent in this district, and so it's an open race. And so we'll see how it plays out. So I'd be honored if you live in the district to have your support, and look forward to doing good things. I think the big issue that I'll be facing Colorado Springs over the next several years is the discussion about what we do with utilities and how we try to keep that very affordable. I'm for keeping our rates as low as possible. I think that's tremendous for economic development, and it would really hurt the city dramatically, I think, if we went away from some of the power generations that we have, trying to clean them up and make them efficient, and trying to make them clean and doing what we need to. So there'll be some open discussion. I know city, they're commissioning a study on Drake and whether that should be decommissioned or not decommissioned, and we'll look at that. But in the end result, part of the reason I moved to Colorado Springs when I started my business many years ago, Waterbed Palace, and did that for 25 years, was because of the way the city provides an environment for us to raise our families, and the kind of environment and people that live in the city of Colorado Springs are just great. And so I want to contribute and give back one more time and see what we can do to make the city better. So
All right, Keith
I appreciate
King,
the
sign
support.
this petition.
So if you live here and would like to sign the petition, I'll just be in the back for a few minutes.
All right, good enough.
Yeah, go ahead and pass that sheet
Yeah,
around.
you
I
have
always
to be-
want it back at the end.
Let's take a couple of minutes just to query quickly, 5 seconds at the most, name and what you do. Go.
City Lions, I'm a freelance writer.
Freelance writer.
Bob Armstrong just uploaded my end-of-year newsletter to cozy.com, COSY.com. Shows that Venus cannot be explained by
5 seconds.
Bingo, Charlie, sorry. I'm the time Nazi. I'm the time Nazi.
My name is Charlie. I'm an artist, aka Ninja.
Artist Ninja.
Clark Maxim and my wife Mary Carroll, we run a private wealth management business.
Management.
Sorry.
Private wealth management
Okay.
business.
Yes.
Robert Miller, I work for Verizon Wireless.
Marty Harper, retired military.
Bethany Rosendahl, I own the Open Gate, which teaches basic financial skills.
Janet Remington, and I just listen.
Michael Remington, retired U.S. Army.
Janice McLean, I manage homeowners associations and among other things.
Chuck Corey, I head up the Equal Justice Foundation.
Cheryl Leslow, high school teacher.
Where?
Air Academy High School.
Thank you.
Another Texan.
Stephen Hoskins, for small business.
Co-founder of the club.
Annie Gail Hoskins, I'm a student.
Ram, Airport Academy, Grand Military, unemployed.
Okay, thank you.
Ali Anderby, I'm an active duty Air Force worker at the Air Force Academy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Paul Anderson, retired physician.
Mary Sennick, psychiatrist, health and board activist.
Look at me. All right.
Angela, student, here.
Okay, they're here for the information, but they're also here for the incentive of the extra credit. And they have a final exam tomorrow. So it's an important time.
Jack Lundberg, retired businessman in Colorado Springs.
Retired manufacturing.
Michael O'Hara.
Okay. And a student here. All right, Trace, why don't you introduce yourself and your service?
I'm Trace. I do political junkie stuff.
Okay, he also runs RockyMountainStreams, which is a wonderful website that records and broadcasts. We are streaming and stream this event tonight, correct?
Yeah, but the camera's aimed up there.
The camera's aimed up here, if we can keep the speaker in line up there, which is coming up right now. Okay, so tonight we have Mr. William Marshall. Will has spoken here before on some insight he had into Money Ain't Free, one of his books. Okay, the fact that corporations are not properly accounting for the opportunity cost of their capital. Is that what I remember right from a couple years ago? He then came back here and taught an entire day's lecture on his Teen Millionaire program. I don't know if any of these students were here for that. We had several. Were you here, Jess? Okay, for that. Teen Millionaire program.
Teen millionaire?
Teen Millionaire.
Does he have an old
He
lady
does.
millionaire?
He has also written a great book which achieved national acclaim and won one of the year's top investment books from Stock Traders Almanac. Rich Share Owner, Poor Share Owner. Okay. You want to be the former, not the latter. These are great books. We have them at the club side here. He also has them for sale. So, Will, autobiography. He's a biography. Number 1, retired treasurer of a Fortune 500 company. Number 2, former Navy lieutenant, naval flight officer, mission commander. Number 3, distinguished Eagle Scout. Number 4, author of 2 books which have been named, I just mentioned you know. His present goal is to speak to as many teens and adults as possible to explain the relationship between free enterprise and freedom. Through his revitalized Teen Millionaire movement and this, you're working a book on tonight? Are you working on a book on tonight's lecture?
Yes.
Okay. Rediscovering Free Enterprise, Freedom's Imperative. Because free enterprise is not about enterprise. It's about freedom. That's the point of it all. The money comes secondarily. It's the freedom that counts. Most of us know that. He welcomes inquiries on speaking to schools of all types and organizations. Let's welcome Mr. William Marshall, tonight's speaker. Why don't you point to me and I'll take care of it. Okay?
You don't want to do that. This
No.
one? This one?
You want to go around, just please.
Move to the next slide. Okay.
It's not working very fast, is it? Is that the next slide?
Okay. Great.
See that? Anybody here want to get in line behind me to shoot Bill Gates? We'll have to go up one, I think.
That will go up one? Okay. Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure to get down here from Estes Park because at 5,000 feet I can breathe again. And it's also a pleasure to come to this group and renew friendship with Paul Prentice. You have a wonderful resource in this gentleman, both for the school and for this organization and the community. So, Paul, thank you for having me again. Paul even set it up tomorrow. I'm going to speak to Joe Woodford's Bastiat Society on the same subject. So we'll have a good chance to share some of these insights with a number of people in the Springs. As many of you know, I'm an engineer by training, and as such, I speak more in terms of what Louis L'Amour would use to explain an economic scenario than I would have an eminent economist, but I think the idea gets across. So forgive me if I speak a little more in plain English than some of the economists you're used to. I'm going to try and share with you this evening 3 things that may help you in your lives. One is some of the ideas that I share with you should help you in your business in the coming year. The second thing is that some of the ideas that I share with you should help you with your investing in the coming year. But I think that some of the ideas I share with you tonight will change for the rest of your life the way you think about free enterprise. In the past 2 presidential elections, we've seen the American population pick big government as opposed to free enterprise to solve our economic problems. And so, it worked. And so what I'm going to do is ask you to listen tonight to think about whether or not we need a new way of restoring free enterprise to this nation. And I'm going to ask you to think about 3 questions as we go through this evening. The first question is, what is the purpose of free enterprise? Is it to make money, or is it something else? What is the purpose of free enterprise? The second issue is, why do people who are intent on destroying free enterprise understand its primary purpose better than we do? The third question is, why is there a defect in our practice of free enterprise that has existed for over 60 years? A defect that has destroyed the level playing field of free enterprise, increased wealth disparity in America, destroys between 15 and 20% of our annual production, and has created a lottery out of the livelihood, life savings, and freedom of every single American. So I'm going to explore those questions tonight.
Well, I have to warn you, every time you change the page, this annoying pop-up is going to come up. You have to just exit out.
Okay. So we go to, so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to rediscover free enterprise, freedom's imperative. What are you going to get out of this besides some good information? Well, what we're doing here tonight is original ideas that should make for some great cocktail conversation, because I don't know of anybody who isn't interested in money. And this is about money, but something more. There's other things you're going to get out of this tonight. And I hope that doesn't come up every time.
Well, I tell you what, if you just minimize it, maybe it'll just be,
Yeah.
minimize it.
It'll-
There you go. There
No,
you
left,
go.
left, there you go, that one. Maybe it'll
Good
be-
idea. All right, what's in it for you tonight?
Yeah, okay.
First of all, you're going to understand the necessity of free enterprise to freedom. The second thing you're going to learn is you're going to learn the defect in our practice of free enterprise and its consequences and how we can eliminate it if we have the will to eliminate it. Third thing you're going to learn is a new third leg of national economic policy. When you think of economic policy, you think of monetary policy and fiscal policy. I've never seen a stool with 2 legs that can stand by itself. The fourth thing you're going to get out of this presentation is a 4-step agenda which can be implemented. I call it a 4-step plus 1 agenda because there is something very secret, which is a 5th step. Let me start near the beginning. March 1296, King Edward I of England, Longshanks, with 35,000 of his seasoned troops, slaughtered 17,000 civilians in Berwick, Scotland. His objective was to intimidate the Scots to accept English rule. Wrong country, wrong people. Longshanks' fatal mistake was he assumed Scotland was ruled from top down rather than driven from the bottom up by the clans. A little more than 1 year later, September 11, 1297, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, William Braveheart Wallace with 40,000 lightly armed clansmen defeated over 68,000 of Longshanks' trained troops and cavalry. The Scots fought for a new idea. They called it freedom. About 500 years later, 1775, the American Revolution began. 9 years later, the British sailed from New York in defeat. During that period of time, George Washington led an army that at times was down to 3,500 men, and there were at times almost 50,000 British troops in country. At one point, when he was down to about 3,500 men in his army, the enlistments of 2,000 of these men expired. The only thing that stood between the end of the Revolution and freedom was George Washington standing in front of these men and explaining to them that if they left, this was the end. They would not have freedom, their families would not have freedom. Freedom. You know, there's another thing I was thinking about the other day. At a time when the American Revolution was going on, we had the Founding Fathers pledging their lives and fortunes to establish a new experiment in government called democracy. Why did they also take the risk of putting in place an entirely new concept of economics called free enterprise? The economics of choice.
It was a republic, not a democracy, sorry.
All right.
Yeah, you just sticklers with that.
Yeah, you got a group here that's sort of.
That's all right. I can take correction. As long as you implement my proposed action, I can take correction.
There you go.
Why did they take the risk on a new economic system called free enterprise at the same time when the economics of choice of the day was feudalism? Let me put free enterprise in context and build up to this defect that exists. Let's talk about the human experience for a second. Between the Big Bang and the final whimper of the last human, individuals collectively comprise mankind and the human experience. Like the flap of a butterfly, every individual affects his peers, his posterity, and his ancestors. Every action has consequences. And the human experience is mankind's moral harvest of his individual and collective actions. It's the conscious ability to shape that moral harvest that separates man from other living things. What does that mean? Man has a choice. Man has a choice in determining the experience that mankind has between the Big Bang and the final whimper. And the choice is a simple one. Live as man has lived throughout history, as serfs and slaves. For example, in Italy during the Roman Empire, 1/3 of the entire Italian population were slaves. Or live as free men in accordance with the laws of nature and nature's God. That's the choice, free or slave. Americans chose freedom, and they expressed it in America's social contract, the Declaration of Independence, which was then codified into the Constitution. Let me paraphrase some of that. Americans believe that freedom in pursuing life, liberty, and happiness is the essence of the capital H-E, human experience. This means that every individual should have the opportunity to realize his or her potential on a level playing field, provided that he or she does not impair the right of others to do the same. And I'll let you read that last paragraph. What are the sources of freedom? I would suggest to you there are two sources of freedom: political freedom and economic freedom. Some will say, well, what about religious freedom? And my response to that is this: that you can be free to think about religion as you want, but try to practice religion in the old Soviet Union or Iraq. you have to have political freedom and economic freedom in order to have your other freedoms. One of the statements that Milton and Rose Friedman made in their great book, Free to Choose, Milton Friedman, of course, was the Nobel laureate from Chicago, was that, you know, you can't mix any political arrangement with any economic arrangement. If you have a command and control economy, like they had in the Soviet Union, where people are dependent for their jobs on the government, you can bet they're going to vote with a government that's going to keep them in high-paying jobs. So you can't just mix any political and economic system. Freedom has two ballot boxes. The first is the political ballot box, where in federal elections you get to exercise your vote once every 2 years. The other ballot box is the economic ballot box, which is a real-time ballot box. It decides in a free economy what is made, what its price is, who gets work, what they're paid. The economic ballot box determines all those factors, not a politician. Imagine if you could only shop once every 2 years. Imagine if you could only buy what the government said could be produced, which, by the way, was what happened in the Soviet Union. Both of these ballot boxes can be stuffed. I'll leave it to your imagination as to how the political ballot box can be stuffed, but the economic ballot box can be stuffed, for example, by regulations that favor one company or one industry versus another. It can be stuffed by economic incentives that are given by the government to favor one industry versus another. There are a number of ways that economic ballot box can be stuffed. There's a constant tension between these two ballot boxes, and perhaps a way to express it is the way Ben Franklin expressed it a number of years ago. There are two passions which have a powerful influence on the affairs of men: ambition and avarice, the love of power and the love of money. There is a tension here. The Founding Fathers understood this because you remember when they wrote the Constitution, they put checks and balances in government, the executive, the legislative, the judicial. I wonder what they knew. Milton and Rose Friedman said it this way, again, in their great book, Free to Choose. Economic freedom is an essential prerequisite for political freedom. By enabling people to cooperate with one another without coercion or central direction, it reduces the area over which political power is exercised. And by dispersing power, the free market provides an offset to the concentration of political power. The combination of economic and political power in the same hands is a sure recipe for tyranny. How many times can we give examples of this? Whether it is the Soviet Union, whether it is Iraq, whether it is Cuba, whether it is Iran.
America.
I leave some of this to your imagination. It's a powerful statement, though, and you ask the question, is perhaps the reason the Founding Fathers were willing to take the risk of a new economic system at the same time they were betting their lives in a war for a new political system, is it perhaps because they understood checks and balances, and they understood that if all the political power resided in one hand, all of a sudden, pretty soon, there wouldn't be any freedom, because the politicians would dictate the economics. I suggest to you that the primary purpose of free enterprise is to ensure freedom by acting as a check and balance on political power. The second purpose of free enterprise is that it is the most effective economic system in many ways in matching needs and resources. You remember in the Soviet Union, their 5-year plans, how they would end up with warehouses full of left foot boots, no right foot boots, and so on and so on. It's the most effective system for motivating and rewarding, and it is also the most environmentally friendly solution, because if something starts to go wrong, people aren't going to pay for it, and you stop producing it. You don't build it up in warehouses. What is the source of economic freedom? I want to bring this down a little bit to the personal level for a second. Choice. When you talk about the personal level, the sources of economic freedom come from the money that you earn in your livelihood, and then you can defer some of this earnings into the future. That's called savings. Savings then consist of what you have deferred plus the return that you generate from your savings, whether it's interest, whether it's capital gains. If a nation introduces some sort of randomness into this that people don't expect, if a nation makes a lottery out of the livelihood and life savings of its citizens, it is sowing the seeds of its demise and the loss of their freedom. And I'm going to amplify this by showing you what we have done to make a lottery out of this for our citizens. There is a defect in our practice of free enterprise that has been known for 60 years. It is making a lottery out of those three things: livelihood, life savings, and freedom. Let me explain a concept that leads into the defect. A group of friends got together one evening to play a friendly game of poker, and they appointed one of the individuals as the gatekeeper to keep the playing field level and the game honest. During the course of the game, as they played, the gatekeeper noticed dirt smudges on the cards, and she used those smudges to win money from the other players. Her rationale was, well, you know, anybody can see those smudges, so we're just going to let it go, play, and see how the game comes out. Her decision, of course, betrayed her character and created their future as friends. These two passions, position, power, and money, someone would say, well, the thing that causes legal cheating is greed. And I, as a manager, say nonsense. If you're saying a human condition can't be managed, then you're just saying, let's go to anarchy. So, as a manager, I ask the question, what causes good people to do bad things? And as I thought of this over several years, I realized what the defect was. Money ain't free. When something is free, it is usually abused. So let me build into the defect. This was aha number one. When I was in business, we were very much getting into the quality process, and W. Edward Deming told the Americans about the quality process in the mid-40s, and Americans wouldn't listen, so the Japanese listened, and he introduced them to the quality process. What causes good people in this case to produce defective products? Well, it all began in the United States with world-class defective products, and we were getting our tails beat off us in terms of building cars that were defective. And the fingers were pointed everywhere, but principally at quote-unquote bad workers. Deming said, wait a minute, let's, instead of measuring market share, let's start measuring defects and empowering people on the production lines to eliminate the defects, fix the process so that it no longer created defects. And pretty soon, the same people that produce world-class defects were producing world-class quality cars. Just through something as simple as measurement linked to pay. Actions follow measurement and pay. And if you happen to measure the wrong thing and correct the wrong thing, you'll still produce defects. So there's that corollary that we need to remember. What Deming taught us here was the power of small to change the world's entire business culture. Any of you in business know that in the 70s and 80s, the business culture of the entire world changed and began to focus on quality metrics. Something as simple as measuring the right thing and linking it to pay. Aha number 2 occurred when my daughter was taking a little summer course over at Notre Dame to see if she wanted to go into engineering, which she did do eventually. And I picked up in the bookstore a book that Einstein had written explaining how he discovered the theory of relativity. And he said, you know, I didn't want to challenge the mathematics of Newton's laws of motion, but I knew that those laws of motion would not work in the high-speed environments of outer space or subatomic particles. So he said, I looked at the assumptions. I changed the assumptions on which the model was based, and voila, E equals mc squared. Let's think about our economy. The assumptions our economy is built on are, we assume it's free enterprise, although obviously there's government intervention, and we assume that we should measure it using a mathematical model called generally accepted accounting principles. This is not the Rosetta Stone. This is not the 10 Commandments. This is a mathematical model. Mathematical models can be wrong. Let's look at this for a second. So here's aha number 3, Adam Smith. What are the requirements of free enterprise? Well, first of all, you all know, there are audiences that wouldn't, that Adam Smith was a moral philosopher. He was not an economist. And his best work he considered to be the theory of moral sentiments, not the wealth of nations. He called it the wealth of nations, not the wealth of individuals, because I believe he understood that free enterprise has a higher calling than just making money. The wealth of nations was read by a number of the founding fathers. In fact, some of you may have read or started to read John Meacham's new book on Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power. And in it, I discovered that William Small, a Scotsman, was a professor at William and Mary in Williamsburg and overlapped 4 years when Jefferson was there. And Jefferson was his student, but also a good friend. Small was a student of Adam Smith and the Enlightenment. And I'm sure that Jefferson heard a number of Adam Smith's things when he was a student, well before he got into 1776. In The Wealth of Nations, when you read between the lines as well as read explicitly, Adam Smith said economic value must be transparent to the workman. In other words, no pun intended here, but the workman needs to understand if he's getting enough bread for the pins he's making. If he does not feel that the loaves of bread he gets in exchange for the pins are enough, he's going to stop making the pins and go do something else to create economic value for himself. So economic value has to be transparent. Second is, what creates economic value? He said there are 3 factors of economic production: raw material, labor, and capital. And when you look at capital, he was talking about return of capital and return on capital. And I broke this out just so you could see return on debt capital and return on equity capital. And he said to create economic value, you have to earn more than the cost of those three inputs. Okay? Let's look at this gap model that we use to measure our entire economy, to allocate resources in our entire economy. This is a simple income statement, sales minus various costs, materials, labor, equipment and buildings, interest expense, taxes. Let's identify each of these costs as the economic factor in Smith's approach. When we do that, we classify them this way. Then let's go one step further and say, okay, let's see if we've covered all three of these factors. Okay, we've covered the cost of raw materials, and I'm going to consider taxes a raw material for the time being, because it's used, among other things, to build roads and so on that are used to transport goods to market. Labor, you've got direct labor on the plant floor, you've got the indirect labor of your selling team, your management team, etc. Return of capital. Remember, depreciation is a return of the money you've spent, but it is not a return on money you've spent. Okay. A return on debt capital, we call that interest expense. So what is missing in the accounting model? Obviously, if I thought it was going to come up on its own, it isn't. The cost of equity. No one is explicitly accountable for a return on the money that share owners invest in the company. It is called capital. And the defect is that our equity is free to management, and this distorts the entire economy. We'll talk about how in just a second. So let's play a little game here. Now I'm trying to get the concept across. The actual solution involves discounted cash flow, but this is the concept. In an amended gap model, what we're going to do is add a line where we subtract the cost of share owners' equity from the income, and we get the share owners' profit or loss. Let me show you how I get that number. I'm going to blow this up so you can read it. Assume this company has 10 shares outstanding and each share has a price of $150. Okay? Since we had income of 100 and 10 shares, that's an earnings per share of 10. So that gives us a price to earnings of 15, which is about where the market is right now, for example. That's the price. So this is not an unusual example. The total market value of all the stock that is outstanding is 10 shares times $150 or $1,500. Over the long run, the return on equity is about 11% for the Standard & Poor's 500 over the long run. Share owners expect management to earn 11% on the market value of their stock, or $1,500 times 11, $165. Otherwise, why would they invest in this company and take the risk of just one company instead of just buying the whole Standard & Poor's 500? Management needs to earn this amount. Well, by golly, they didn't. They actually lost money. So what happens when a company loses money? I'm just reiterating the numbers you've just seen. You did have income on the old GAAP statement of 100, but when you subtract out the cost of equity, you actually lost money. What happens? This sequencing is going to be off here, I think, because of our sticks, so I'll just put them here. We go. First of all, when a company loses money, you start measuring people differently and you start paying them differently. If they are now measured for covering the cost of capital, they all of a sudden become accountable for creating economic value, not gaming the accounting numbers by doing things like changing the assumptions on their actuarial expense or changing depreciation schedules. Second, efficiency is increased. Efficiency is about doing things right the first time. It's like the quality process. But you can go broke being efficient if you're efficient and don't make money. So the next step is effectiveness is increased. What you start doing is asking the question, am I covering the cost of capital by doing what I'm doing? And if you aren't, you do something different. An emphasis is placed on innovating new products because products all go through a life cycle and become commoditized, the margins decline, they become unprofitable. Prices are increased, which means less is produced. If you look at this and this, what we're saying is we cut out the waste. Think of something. If a company, think about the auto industry for a second. We're producing all these cars, but we have to rescue the auto companies because they're not creating economic value. That means they're producing too many cars. Think of all the waste there is and the energy it takes to produce excess autos. If the prices were increased, the marketplace would regulate how many cars were made, and we wouldn't make as many cars. We wouldn't have 2 cars in every garage, maybe only 1 in every house, maybe only 1.5, or whatever. And finally, the share owners gain because stock prices will go up as the value of as the economic value of the companies go up. So what happens when money is free? Let me show you a different parameter. I've always used this in my own management. It comes out of science, of course. All matter seeks its own lowest energy state until stimulated. If you don't have the proper incentives on management, they play games with accounting rather than producing new products and increasing the margins. We create a culture of wealth shifting in companies where it is easier for a CFO to figure out how he can use an eraser and a pencil to change certain assumptions in the financial statements to produce income, rather than forcing the CEO to go out and come up with new products through his research department. Bad public policy decisions. Let me show you just one simplistic bad policy decision. And then I'll relate it to a couple of other. Big oil. Exxon's market cap was last year about $406 billion. I'm going to assume for simplicity it was that for 3 years. That means management had to earn $44 billion a year to earn that 11% that share owners expect. Here was their net income in 2009, 10, and 11. When you subtract 44 billion off that, sorry,
There's an up there over there.
yeah, I understand. Up and down is a problem for me. Okay. Big oil has been losing money, and yet we've heard all the pundits like O'Reilly complaining that big oil's making too much money. Now, let me play another game with you. You remember in the 70s and 80s when we went from 450,000 employees in the U.S. steel industry to under 250,000 and the steel companies were going out of business? What if there had been a charge for equity capital in the financial statements of those steel companies for a number of years? Do you think maybe that management and unions would have recognized that they couldn't pay these high health and medical benefits and stay in business? Because remember, when the steel industry went out, there was no government to rescue them. The beneficiaries who were retired had to give up part of their health benefits and part of their retirement benefits. I know this because I was born and raised in Pittsburgh. Same thing on the airline industry. A lot of airlines went bankrupt because they were paying too high benefits, among other things. If there had been a charge for equity capital, do you think that people might have thought more about whether or not they could afford to pay these high wages, benefits, whatever, and still stay in business? They lost, the airline employees lost a lot of their benefits because they had been too high relative to the economic environment. And of course, there's the auto industry. How many years did they pay high retirement and medical benefits for retirees when in fact those companies were going bankrupt? So I think bad public policy decisions result when you do not have a charge for equity capital. Why hasn't this defect been eliminated? I would suggest to you that conspiracy is too strong a term. It smacks of paranoia, but coincidence is too meek a term. It oozes naivete. What do you call 60 years of systematic actions? Because the capital asset pricing model, which says there is a cost to equity capital, has been around for 60 years. What do you call the actions that have destroyed the level playing field of free enterprise? I call the people who are involved the royal mob. And I call them the royal mob because they have allowed this condition to exist in spite of the fact that they knew it existed, because I believe part of this is they feel entitled to a lifestyle in spite of the consequences to their fellow Americans' freedom. Who are the perps? First of all, there's the Washington Wall Street complex. This is comparable to the military-industrial complex. This replaces the military-industrial complex as the greatest threat, I believe, to the American economy. I'll explain why in a second. These people all know about the defect. I mean, they are in finance. They've heard of the capital asset pricing model. They are economists. They are MBAs. Who else knows? The accounting professors know about it. CPAs, government auditors, they were taught the capital asset pricing model. Who else knows? Finance professors obviously do. Economics professors do. They know there's a cost to capital. Business school professors, people in the EPA who have gone to business school, securities lawyers. I'm not going to say everybody knows equally or everybody could have done equally, but they all know there is a cost to capital, and none of them have stood up and done anything about it. I read a great, in the John Meacham book, and it seems that Jefferson subscribed to this little phrase from Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher. He said, and he was describing what enlightenment was. His book was about enlightenment. Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's understanding without guidance from another. The immaturity is self-imposed when its cause lies not in the fact that you don't understand something, but rather that you lack the resolve to fix it. So I'll let you decide where the fault lies in that group. but I believe that the royal mob has not fixed something that they know is distorting our free enterprise economy and stealing economic freedom, and therefore freedom, from citizens. All right, I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but I just want to share this with you. To those of you who do understand the capital asset pricing model, I describe the solution in both my books, but in more detail. Rich share owner, poor share owner. Stock has two cash values, and this is where investing comes in. Price is what you pay. Value, enterprise value, is what you get. And I'll explain enterprise value briefly in a second. You'll notice, though, who knows this. This is a quote from Buffett. Stock enterprise value is the present value of all the free cash flow, cash that can be returned to share owners after you make investments for growth, that is or will be in the company, minus any debt. To explain it at a very high level, you can determine the amount of cash value of a company the same way you would determine the cash value of your own portfolio. You take the cash that's in your money market account. In the case of a company, the company has cash in the bank. You then add the market value of the stock in your portfolio. In the case of a company, you calculate the present value of all the cash, free cash flow, and you discount it at the cost of capital, say 11%, assuming no debt. And then you have to subtract off the debt that's in your portfolio, because you have to use cash to pay off this debt. So the real value of your portfolio is the cash plus the stock value minus the debt you have to pay off using that cash. Same thing in a company. At any rate, that's as far into the weeds as I'm going to go with that. In theory, a dollar is a dollar, so stock price and enterprise value ought to be the same. The reality is stock price is constantly fluctuating around enterprise value, the cash in the company. And if you were a shrewd stock investor, you would buy down here and you would sell up here, because if a dollar is a dollar, cash, the stock price will always regress to the mean. And the mean is the enterprise value. If enterprise value were transparent and published, stock market volatility would not be as great. It would be closer to enterprise value, because why is somebody, gonna buy or sell way up at these extremes when they know that the enterprise value is about here? So volatility, the randomness, is caused by the failure to publish a transparent enterprise value. Other consequences of the defect, and then we'll get to the agenda. It has destroyed the level playing field of free enterprise. For example, if you were to buy stock on margin, and I hope none of you do, but if you do, you have to put up 40% cash. When a bank buys stock using derivatives, they only have to put up 10% cash. Why? Why should banks have that advantage over individuals? It distorts the entire economy. It has collapsed public confidence in free enterprise when we see companies overpaying for acquisitions and then having to lay off a lot of people to cover the mistakes of the CEOs. Enterprise value, the publication of enterprise value would help reduce that. It has transformed financial markets into casinos. When you have stock that moves 17% in one day, don't you dare tell me that markets are efficient. And the overproduction wastes the GNP every year. Okay. It steals our freedom overall. let's talk about the agenda for rediscovering free enterprise. First of all, words matter. When you use the word capitalism, you've lost the argument. You've lost the argument. We have to use the word free enterprise. 90% of the people, when you hear the word capitalism, think of this guy. They don't think of the person down in the bake shop working his tail off baking bread, or in the small company. All right, there is another difference between free enterprise and capitalism. Well, let me just finish this up. Marx and Engels are the ones who defined capitalism in the public mind. They used the term capitalist and capitalist means of production 2,600 times in their Das Kapital trilogy. Adam Smith never used the word capitalism once. We lose the argument when we use the wrong words. So we have to stop using the word capitalism. But what is the other reason why free enterprise is not capitalism? Free enterprise is about free people in free markets operating on a level playing field to create economic value by meeting customer needs. Capitalism, you know, we've heard of crony capitalism where the argument was big business is influencing government. It has now morphed to crony government. When government is 25% or more of the economy, it is the politicians controlling the budgets or the regulations that in essence are controlling the companies and what the companies do. Let me give one quick example here. Every day when I lived in Golden, before I moved up to Estes, I would drive by the National Renewable Energy Lab and see those big windmills out there. And after the financial crisis, I just scratched my head and say, look, NREL costs $600 million a year. We just spent $5 billion bailing out General Electric. Why isn't General Electric doing the research on those wind towers? We just spent $60 billion bailing out GM and what was it, another 30 in Chrysler? Why aren't they researching battery-powered cars? Crony government. But let's take this one step further. As crony government gets bigger and government gets bigger, when do you draw the line between crony government and socialism, which Marx defined as a transitory step to communism? Where do you draw the line? Capitalism is not free enterprise. It involves images people have, and it also has the reality of moving further away from the level playing field. So use the right words. We have to do that if we're going to win this. Economic policy. We all know fiscal policy. This includes supply-side economics, which is nothing more than fiscal policy in a different dress, tax policy. We've heard of monetary policy, which is attempts, again, to pull demand by inflating the money supply. I thought that this nation was about free enterprise. Why don't we explicitly state somehow in public documents that the economic policy of this nation is free enterprise? And I'm going to suggest that we need an approach to free enterprise, which I call M&M, enterprise, measurement, and motivation. We need to create a method to cause companies to measure and create economic value, not accounting numbers, and motivate people to increase that economic value by linking pay to the new measures of economic value. And we need a new free enterprise ethic that is related to this.
Well, I need to interrupt for just a minute.
Sure.
It's nothing to do with you. But we got a late start because I took too much time for club business. I've got a lot of students here. The final exam starting at 7:45 in the morning. Your excuse, you're free to go. Thank you all for coming.
Thank God.
I'll get your summaries. You hand in your summaries and you're on the lecture. Stay if you want. Be great. So you may go. Thank you.
So I think we need a new free enterprise ethic, which is a benchmark against which to judge things. And the free enterprise ethic relates to the question, does this regulation, does this tax level or distort the playing field of free enterprise and make it equal for all participants? Step 3, eliminate the defect in the practice of free enterprise. I think we have to add a 4th financial statement, the valuation statement, because we're not going to get rid of the other 3 financial statements. But the valuation statement would show an estimate of enterprise value. This is a number that can be audited. I think we need to create an Adam Smith National Enterprise Value Award. It should be modeled after the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, and it should incent companies, not economists, not individuals. It should be an award for companies who show the ability to create economic value through metrics and pay, and who teach other companies how to do it, the same way Malcolm Baldrige is structured. This is one I care about a lot because it's the future generation. I believe we've lost people in free enterprise because we are not really teaching them about free enterprise. And I think one of the most effective ways to do it is to teach them how to become millionaires. You know, a 15-year-old can become a millionaire for $3.36 a day. There are 3 steps he or she has to do that. Commit, save, invest. Decide you're going to do it. Second, save that $3.26 a day. Now, you may earn it all in the summer, but on average, $3.26 a day during the year for a 15-year-old. And then invest it in a mutual fund or mutual funds, or balanced mutual funds. There are several that I identify on my website for young people that have earned between 8 and 9% compound over the past 10 years. This gets them into recognizing and doing the things that they can do to buy their own economic freedom on the installment plan. Grandparents and parents can do it for $1 a day for a baby. And we need to recognize teachers who actually teach people about free enterprise. All right, this is the last one. This is the +1. We need to eliminate full black economics. What is that? Well, it comes from the military. Brad Thor, the best-selling author, wrote a book, Full Black, and this is how he defines it. He said, you know, in clandestine operations, there's something called black ops, secret or top secret operations, like going after Osama bin Laden. But there are even more secret things that people won't even admit exist. It's called full black. What do I mean by full black economics? The economists don't talk about the fact that there is a group of things that are being done out there using laws, regulations, and the defect in our practice of free enterprise to distort this level playing field of free enterprise. No one will talk about it. And if you don't talk about it, you're never going to solve it. The defect is one. The use of derivatives. Some will ask, and Joe asked me today when we were talking, you know, in the past 10 years, the stock market hasn't returned 11%. Why is that? There are $750 trillion worth of derivatives out there. I believe investment bankers have figured out how, the risk return in the markets. I think they have figured out how to use derivatives to put return in their pocket while shifting risk to banks. And who just rescued the banks? The taxpayers. I believe derivatives currently are being used to reduce returns and arbitrage the risks over to taxpayers. Dodd-Frank is another example of full black economics. They created these regulations that in theory were designed to prevent banks from, prevent the too big to fail philosophy. Well, the banks are big. The big banks are bigger now than before the housing bubble. The fact of the matter is, the only way to prevent too big to fail is to prevent too big. We have to break up the banks. We have to make them smaller. I won't spend more time on that. Solutions to full black economics, we have to define a benchmark against which to judge regulations and new laws. If it doesn't make it level for everyone, we have to consider getting rid of it. So those are the four-step agenda that I think can be implemented with a lot of work, but there's something tangible we can work on. The four-step plus one. To wrap up, I believe we are in a culture war that is as critical to America's future as the American Revolution, because it's about our economic freedom, and if we lose economic freedom, we lose political freedom, the balance. On one side are people like Adam Smith, Milton Friedman, Hayek, Sowell, Schumpeter, Peter Drucker, the management guru, and many in this room, who believe that the purpose of free enterprise is to create a larger economic pie, distributed to producers on merit. On the other side, on a second side, are those like Warren Buffett, Trader George Soros, the Fed chairman, who believe it's ethical to use an undisclosed defect in the practice of free enterprise to slice the pie in their favor without increasing the size of the pie for their fellow citizens. And on a third side are those, and I suppose I could not specifically talk to about President Obama there, but I mean, he has implemented some of these things, who either do not understand how free enterprise works and its relationship to freedom, or who have decided that they want an agenda of big trickle-down government determined by political elites who use political power to slice the pie in their favor while decreasing the size of the pie for their fellow citizens. This is the culture war that we are in over economic freedom. The purpose of free enterprise is to ensure freedom by acting as a check and balance on political power. So I thank you very much for your time, and I hope there's been some useful information here for you.
Thank you, Ralph. Will has almost, but not quite, convinced me to stop calling myself a capitalist and stop using that phrase in my classes. I might just start transition to see if I get, maybe I might be more effective, just call it free enterprise. I think Martha Brooke of the Enterprise Institute did a survey, it's a survey that showed that something like only 30% of Americans believe capitalism is a good economic system, but 70% believe free enterprise is a good economic system. So there's a confusion of definitions, and it's possible we may not be able to salvage what I consider to be the term of the capitalist economy. Anyway, thank you very much. Do you have time for a few questions?
If they'd like, yes.
Okay, if we have a few questions, I would like just come and line up over here as if we had a mic, but we don't. that'll help Trace maybe work the cameras at it. So you get to jump up, huh? Jump up. Okay, so take them one at a time.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay?
When you talked about equity, were you referring to it as sweat equity? Or was equity?
When I was talking about equity, was I talking about sweat equity, or was I talking about financial equity where you actually invest the money? I was referring to it as financial equity put in by share owners. At the same time, there is a point at which you could make an argument for accounting for the sweat equity some way and putting it into the value of the company.
I want to kind of challenge on your players that you have
Yeah.
that we need to change. There are two that I think that we're missing. One is the first player that's missing are the unions. Because the unions now, I looked at New York State, I think the top pension for a teacher is $585,000 a year pension. By the way, we're in the wrong job. And this is, again, unions have pushed this, and then you look that they've underfunded their pension funds. Those pension funds are the major investors, and they're the ones that actually are kind of dictating how the market is being played.
Right.
As an owner of Apple stock, I constantly see the pension funds being the ones that are manipulating the stock prices more than anybody else. So I would say that you need to put unions in there as one of your players, and probably one of the biggest players, more so than college professors. Not to downplay what college professors can do. And the second one that I would challenge you on is what we have now ended up in is where our federal government seems to now control, through crony capitalism, our media. So GE owns MSNBC. Warren Buffett is a major owner. And these are people that are taking large dollar sums from the government,
Right.
contracts or whatever, and are using their media influence to influence what the government does. I think it's a very bad relationship. And so that cronyism, if you're going to identify a problem area, is one, if we don't get government out of media to fourth estate, you'll never be able to get these points across, because the media is going to protect exactly what you're trying to fight against.
I agree with you on both of those points, except I'm going to modify one. I did have union officers up there as people who do know about this defect, because in fact many of them do have MBAs. I did not put the media up there per se as knowing about crony capitalism, but I guess you could, because I'm sorry, about knowing about the defect. But I guess you could say a large number of the people in the media have MBAs, and yeah, they should be up there.
Okay.
So you talk about the defect is the not getting the payment on the equity investment.
Right.
But hasn't that been the way it's been from the very beginning, not just the past 60 years? You got your debt investors typically get less, but they get a fixed amount, whereas the equity investors go all over the board. In the long run, hopefully they'll get paid more. So I'm not sure how that's changed in the last 60 years. The equity investors have always been paid a sporadic amount.
The answer is, the question is, why am I just focusing on the past 60 years? Hasn't this defect been around since inception of accounting? And you are absolutely right. It has been around since the inception of accounting. I think it has become more of a problem now, because now, you know, before capital asset pricing model was formally described, many of the owners were also managing the companies, and so they were involved. Now we have absentee owners, but also now, you know, at some point on certain things you reach a tipping point where all of a sudden it is such a material problem for society that we have to make it explicit. I think we've reached the point where there are over 100 million share owners in America right now, and that doesn't include their dependents, or their wives or husbands, their spouses, or their children. These people aren't sophisticated enough to see through this. And they aren't as close to the business as the old owners and managers were. So I think I think we've reached a tipping point where we have to be more explicit. That's all I'm saying. But you are exactly right. This defect has been around since the beginning of time.
Okay, well then, the other question is, like, you chose 11%. I see how you got that, but why choose a specific amount? Doesn't it vary tremendously right now? Significantly less, because you get even less on your debt financing because of the Fed's printing money for free. And so, hey, if I can get 3%, hey, that's a whole lot better than 0% I'm getting at the bank. Or the bond market is just, so outrageously blown up now. We have me to take my 5% return on the equity. So why do we choose 11%? I would think the free market would be able to figure out the best areas of that.
I think you have to start somewhere with a benchmark. And I would argue that you start with a benchmark for return on equity that is based upon a long-term return. I will break into another comment that you made here because it's a slightly different issue. I think you have to have a benchmark. I think it ought to be a long-term return. Should it be 11% or 10%? I don't care. I know that if I say 11% and it's really 10%, I'm 10% wrong, or 9.8% wrong. I know anybody who says it's 0 is 100% wrong. And that's what we're saying now. The other thing you were saying, which is interesting, and I will make a comment on, because we now have in the Fed an unelected body who has increased taxes on Americans just on the federal debt by $500 billion a year. You know how they've done that? They've done that by the fact that historically the return on bonds is 2.5% above the inflation rate. 30-year bonds right now are 2%. The inflation rate is 2%. They're stealing 2.5% a year from everybody who's saved and invested in those bonds. So that's a little bit why I wouldn't, I hesitate to take some of the current interest rates because they are being distorted by policy.
I agree with that.
I'm just trying to smooth it a little.
Okay.
And because equity risk is higher, that's why I'd use an 11% number rather than a bond return of around 3%. Does that help?
Yeah.
I might have forgot my question really because I was trying to grasp my brain around this idea and everything. You were talking about the defect and the solutions that you're proposing in the end. And what was mentioned by Stephen is that the defect on the equity return, if that's the right term that I'm thinking right now, has been in existence, as you said, long before the Federal Reserve. Isn't it easier when the Federal Reserve was implemented that really accelerated the problem, or in a lack of education for, I guess, for people to understand how money works? It's probably useful to focus on the Federal Reserve more than trying to soften things up with the current central banking system. Does that make sense with my question? With the Fed?
Yes, and I would answer it this way. I think there are a lot of problems that exist because of the Fed, okay? But the problem of the failure to include a cost of equity capital in accounting statements is not a problem that the Fed caused. So I consider it to be a different problem than the problems the Fed has created.
I got you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that high-frequency trading adds liquidity to the market, or is it a tool by the power brokers to skew things more in their favor?
High-frequency trading. Well, I would throw into that question not only high-frequency trading, But I would throw into that question the ability to short stocks and other derivatives.
Naked shorts or all shorts?
All shorts. I think shorting stock is shorting America. Does high frequency increase liquidity? My response is, you know, you can eat a certain amount of ice cream, but if you try to eat 5 gallons, you get sick. I believe we have exceeded the tipping point where all this volume of trading does not add liquidity. In fact, what it does is it creates opportunities for people to move the market with no fundamental underlying value reason. I think we ought to phase derivatives out. I think we ought to phase short selling out. I don't think when you've got $15 trillion worth of stock in the cash markets, I don't see why that isn't enough liquidity.
Thank you, Willis. Put an end to the formal evening, but please feel free to stay with a few minutes while we're cleaning up, have an extra cookie or a snack. And once again, a great round of applause. Thank you.